Hello and welcome to today's episode of Courage Permission Slip. I, of course, am your host, Kia, and today I am so glad and excited that I get to welcome Autumn Haile to the show. And before we get started, I want to tell you just a little bit more about her. Autumn is a writer and music industry veteran who has worked on campaigns for artists such as Jay-Z, Rhianna, and Taylor Swift. And she was one of the first to write about Kacey Musgraves and Kelsea Ballerini, who, if you are a country music fan, you know that these ladies are huge stars now. Autumn is also the head of content for Frank, which is a financial services and education company for college students. And last, but certainly not least, Autumn also owns the Vineside Wine Bar in Astoria, Oregon. Welcome, Autumn.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you are here. And, as I was, you and I have had conversations. And then, of course, reading your background to prepare for this, it's like, oh my God, there's so much that we could dive into. There's so many roads that we can go. But I think the first thing that has struck me and still strikes me is you are really a living example of, multi-hyphenate life, having a portfolio career. You're the head of content, you're a business owner, you still have a writing business on the side as well. And I'm curious to hear from you. How do you manage all of that?
I get asked that question so much. Most of my friends and family members know that I am always kind of working. I'm not someone who likes to just sit still. I always want to find either new avenues to explore, new industries to explore. And really, for me, over the years, it's just come down to time management, blocking out the time I need to accomplish the certain goals I need to meet each day. But I mean, the reason I do all those things and keep myself busy like that isn't just because I want to be busy. I'm really excited about everything that I do. I love to write. I adore and love learning and talking and being around wine, which is how the wine bar started. And I have really for the first time in my professional corporate career, have enjoyed the work I'm doing with Frank. So even though I could maybe make life easier on myself and give up one of these things, I just really enjoy everything that I do. And it's about carving out the time to make sure I get to do all of those things I'm excited about.
So the time blocking that you mentioned is like people, sometimes they poo-poo it. And it is so important. And just as you said, right, like you have all these things and you have the blessing and the curse of having a lot of things that you truly enjoy, that give you energy, and that, are kind of in your purview. But it is so important that we block out time on our calendars for all the things. And even if it's not work related stuff, right? Like sometimes it can be like scheduling time to work out, or scheduling time to read, right? To be off screen. And not that I'm a proponent of like having an overscheduled life, but when you are really getting into this arena of having to manage multiple things and commitments in your life, managing your schedule and your energy in all of that is super important. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it's like, yeah, this is a real thing and it can work. It is doable.
Yeah, and it is a learning curve. I know I was not always good at managing my own personal time and my own energy. I would a lot of times overstuff my schedule and then not be energetic enough to even go hang out with my friends. So it was really just throughout my life learning how and when to say no, really.
Yes.
And like, I can't take this on, I can't do this right now, and learning to scale back so that I could focus on like myself and the other things in life that aren't work related that make me happy.
Exactly. And it's and I think it's important to say that this is easier said than done, because
Mm.
at least I know I have a tendency to like pack my schedule because I get a little overconfident in myself. Like, oh, like things are going really smoothly. I've got this on lock, and then something will happen, or I'll take on one too many things, and then it's like, oh, well, this sucks.
Yeah.
I've gone off the road here.
Yeah, I've been there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So this is one of those things that it's a muscle to build. But speaking of muscles, because a lot of people talk about this is a muscle that they have to build, but as you know, this is a show about giving people courage permission slips, and would love to hear from you. When you hear the word courage, what does it mean to you or for you?
I've been told since I was maybe 21 that I was a very courageous person. I've done a lot of things that maybe some people would consider crazy, but other people consider courageous. um, and it's so strange because as I was thinking about us talking about courage, I never felt courageous.
Mm.
And when people would say, like, when I was 22, I moved to Nashville with no job and no friends and just took a chance and went. And really, for me, I was like, well, I don't feel courageous, but I'm not scared of what's going to happen. This is just something I feel called to do right now, and I can't let the fear of doing it hold me back. And that's sort of how I've operated in life. And that's how I came back to this idea that for me, courage is really being fearless, which is by no stretch easy to do. And I don't think for anyone, unless you're very lucky, courage is an easy thing to have in general. But I think those two words are synonymous to me.
Yeah. So and before you even said this, I was going to bring this up because you were talking about how you didn't feel courageous in the moment. And a number of people who have been on this show, they didn't feel the courage until after the fact, right? Like it was, like you said, it was one of those things that you knew that it was something that was important for you to do. And the consequences weren't really a factor, but in the moment, it didn't feel courageous. They didn't think of themselves as courageous. They didn't, it didn't even dawn on them. And like you said, other people would call it out and say, oh my God, like that's really brave. That's really courageous. And, their response is, oh, well, I just knew it was something that I had to do, right? Like I didn't feel like it was an option. And so for you, to that point, I'm curious, what was the thing that was driving you to move to Nashville, and what was the alternative to not going that had you feeling like, it didn't feel like it was a courageous decision?
I went to music school and studied vocal technique and was very focused on country music. I grew up, my grandmother was from Georgia. I grew up around country music. It's what I wanted to sing. I thought I was going to be a musician. And for me, there was no other choice. Like I was a Southern California girl. At the time, it was very strange for Southern California girls to even be interested in country music. And I felt like in order to make my career happen and get the experience I believed I needed, Nashville was where I had to go. And it was like I graduated music school, and a month and a half later was in a car driving across the country to Nashville. It was just, I was gonna do it. Nobody could talk me out of it. And it didn't feel courageous. It just felt like, well, there's nothing for me here. So the only alternative is to go where the resources and the business is.
That's really, really interesting. And again, it just proves the point that it doesn't have to be this like huge gargantuan thing, right? It is just this thing that it sounds like for you, Autumn, it was something that was just in you. As you said, you went to college and this is what you study, and that is in your background. And so it just was something that was in you that you were like, this is something that I feel like I need to do. And so come hell or high water, this is where I'm going. This is where I need to be to make something happen.
So, and I will say like,
go ahead.
I know so many people who have said things to me like, oh, I wish I could just move to this city or move here or go there. And I've always sort of been a believer in just do it. And I do understand, you know, there are obstacles, financial and job wise, but I feel like if I had let those things hold me back, I never would have gotten where I am today. So there's like something to be said about pushing through. I mean, I'll be honest, I couldn't find a job when I got to Nashville. I was super broke. There were days where when I did finally land a part-time job, I didn't even have the money to fill up my gas tank to get to work. And it was probably one of the worst decisions I could have made for myself in terms of financial, but I didn't feel that I could do anything else. And I feel like if you push yourself out of your comfort zone, that is when you really start to find what's right for you. And that can be a success or a failure. But for me, it was always like, I just have to do this. I just have to go, and I have to hope for the best.
I really appreciate your optimism, and I so appreciate you sharing that, you know, that really real hurdle that I think a lot of people are scared of not having money, right? Like you say, you didn't even have enough money to fill up your gas tank. And, you know, something that comes up when thinking of making those big moves, right? Or it can even be a little move, but you know, that feeling of failure, that feeling that, you know, I hear this a lot. People are like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to be like, you know, cat lady living in my car under a bridge. And so you could have easily turned around when you were like, man, you know, I can't do basic things for myself, right? Like filling up your gas tank. What was it that kept you going? Because many people would get to that and be like, well, okay, I'm just going to have to go back to what I came from. How did you keep going in the face of those really tough, like fundamental, like life necessities?
I think every time I've made a really big decision, and I think with any big change you make in your life, you face those kind of hurdles, like whether it's a financial or something different, something personal. And for a really long time, that driver for me, and I hate to say this because I don't think anyone should really live their lives this way, but it was fear of failure. I moved to Nashville twice. The first time I moved, I turned around and came home after a year. And to me, that was a failure. And every other time I've made big decisions since that, I have been where I'm like, I don't want to fail again, and pushed through obstacles in any way that I could. I mean, I know how to hustle and be multi-hyphenate because I had to make everything work the way I needed it to work for all of my goals. But I do feel like trusting your intuition, because I knew at some point it wasn't the right space for me. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And to stay there and push through, like I realized the life of a performer, it wasn't for me. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life broke, performing to crowds that are talking over me, maybe traveling all over the country as like a backup singer, not doing my own thing. It just
Mm,
dawned on me it wasn't my road. Um,
mm.
and so I turned around and went back. And um, I think it's all about intuition. It's really listening to yourself and understanding, okay, I can't be mad if this wasn't the right road for me. It's okay to turn around and go back. And then if you're like, no, this is just an obstacle and I have to push through, listen to yourself when that comes up too.
So what was it? So you said you moved to Nashville twice, and the first time you left because it felt like you had failed, right? But you went back. So what was it that gave you the courage to go back? Like, what was that? So because you made that realization that vocal performing wasn't your path, right? Which, you know, that may have felt like failure in the moment, but the fact that you took a step back and realized that you could go back and then you reevaluated the goal, that is, I mean, that is the farthest thing from failure, right? Because some people could hit that and be like, well, I'm not going to try again, right? I'm going to go the safe route. So what was it that after you reassessed that took you back to Nashville and put you on a different path?
So it was probably almost 5 years later that I moved back to Nashville. And I had started writing. I'd always been in love with writing. Part of what I loved about music was the songwriting aspect of it. That was always the part I enjoyed more so than the performance aspect. And so I started writing about music, writing about artists that I love. I started a blog in Southern California about country artists performing in California, people who were stopping in, about records that I really loved that were coming out. That's like 2013. I wrote about Kacey Musgraves years before she won a Grammy. And I was just, I found something I was really passionate about. And I think it took off in a small way. I mean, I had a really great following in the country music scene. It was good enough that I could start getting credentials to go to festivals and award shows. And at some point it got popular enough where I was being asked to write for other publications. And it was like, you know what, it might be time to go back to Nashville. There's a lot happening here. I feel like this is a great starting off point to build my own career. And I, the second time, got a job before I went there, which was great. I had a lot of people had started actually moving there from Los Angeles, so I had friends there. Everything felt like it was a lot more aligned the second time, and I felt like I had a really concrete goal. I didn't have a complete vision of where I was going, but I knew like this writing thing, I loved it, and I wanted to pursue that and see where I could take it.
So many really great nuggets in there. Not only, you know, the reassessing, right? So this time around, you had a job when you went, and then really leaning into the things that gave you energy, right? Like writing had become a thing, right? You were getting traction, you were getting visibility, and then connecting those things that you loved to create this new path for you. But you couldn't have known that if you didn't take that first step that was a little scary, right? So there's a lot of permission giving just in this, in this little sect of your life, right? Which opened the door to other things. So, I'm curious to hear from you, and maybe it's what you just talked about, but how did giving yourself permission lead you to where you are now or to some other stop on your journey?
Yeah, I was in Nashville, I think that second time for 2 years. I kept running the blog. I started being in Nashville actually. I experienced talking to artists, a lot of the issues that female artists and minority artists face in Nashville. And I got really passionate about that and started another sort of publication around women in country music specifically to sort of educate about what you could do to make your voice heard, to educate people on the hurdles that they were facing, because there is a sort of, it's very Southern in Nashville. You might not think it, but don't talk about it. You don't want to make anybody angry. I'm not that person. I grew up basically in Los Angeles, so I'm sort of a loudmouth. And I think just finding this ability to connect with people, finding ways to break down barriers, and realizing, I didn't just have to write about country music. I was meeting all these people who wanted me to write bios for them, wanted me to help them write captions on their Instagram account. I'm sorry, my cat's jumping onto my.
We're pet friendly.
Okay.
Pet friendly platform.
And I think that was really the jumping off point for me for where I am today, because I started dabbling in content writing and figuring out, I don't just have to be a journalist, which I came to not love in Nashville, because I felt like I was always being told like not to use my voice. But I could do content writing. I could help people find their voice through journalism and talking to artists. Like, I realized how little people have an opportunity to do that, or even know how to do that. And that became really important to me as I helped people on as a consultant. I realized what I didn't like. I don't like being in an atmosphere that I don't feel cultivates and celebrates the differences in people. And I very much felt in Nashville, there was a lot of just, sit there, look pretty, be quiet if you're a woman. And I was like, well, that's it. I'm heading off to New York, because I know I can have a voice there. I know people don't have a problem with that. It's a cultural melting pot. And I felt like I had really good roots in what I now knew I wanted to do. I wanted to keep writing, but I wanted to make money, and content marketing is a step up from journalism as far as money making goes. And as soon as I got to New York, that was the avenue I started pursuing.
So I'm gonna take it back to Nashville for just a moment, because Autumn, it seems like you were ahead of your time, right? Because I think of, summer of 2020 was a big flashpoint for many non-Black people. And you were ahead of your time in terms of helping women in Nashville find their voice, but then also artists of color. And so I'm thinking of, come to present day, I'm thinking of Mickey Guyton and how she did that performance. Was it at the CMAs or was it at the American Country Music Awards, where she did that performance with those two other Black women about, it was a song about hair, and they walked on the stage with these gorgeous afros and braided, beautiful. And I think about other artists, white artists, who have spoken up in defense of Black lives, and how that really, just you talking about it, it was you're just going to be nice and not make trouble. And that really pulled the curtains back in a big way. So you were ahead of your time. And I'm curious what comes forward for you as you think about what you were doing then and how that translates to now.
I know.
Was it scary? Sorry to interrupt, but was it scary, right? Because it's right.
Yeah, I felt so much frustration because I have been in love with music my whole life, but I didn't grow up in the South. And I, like I said, basically grew up in Los Angeles, and I believe in educating yourself about other cultures. I believe in helping other people succeed, especially if you're the person who has a leg up in the situation. I didn't really have the capacity or the influence to make a difference but I could listen to people who were facing issues. Sometimes I got to have really candid conversations with people, and other times it was like, oh no, like I don't really want to talk about that. And one thing that has frustrated me as all of this has come out, I mean, we're seeing and hearing way more women in country music these days. I still think it's too oversaturated with men, but that's fine. Mickey Guyton, oh my God, I went to so many shows where she was performing in Nashville when I lived there, and I could not understand how she wasn't bigger, and seeing her get her chance to shine, incredible. I do see there are changes being made. I do think when you take a look at the film industry and other aspects of the music industry, country music is still so far behind.
Sure.
There have been no conversations really about, I know like Kelsea, Ballerini, Kacey, Musgraves, they stand up for Black lives. It's really important to them to find diversity. They're very outspoken. I think Marion Morris is another one.
Yep.
But they have the fame to be outspoken. If you're still a woman who doesn't, having a voice is very hard to break through in country music, and that still really frustrates me. But I do see change, and I was just talking to someone about this the other day. Like, it's great to see it taking its baby steps, because it really needs to come out of that space that it was in. But I feel it could be a lot more, and someone is still like zippering people shut to not talk about things that have gone on, which is, I mean, I find it frustrating, because that's like what I believe it should be. It should start to step up now. Like it's time to change. You're making your way there, but you really got to just push through.
Right. And we know a lot of that zippering of, people's voices and their stance on things is rooted in fear. And I'm curious to hear from you. You talked about fearlessness and how you define courage, and fear is not something that ever goes away, right? And it's balancing the fear and prioritizing what you want to do over it. And I'm curious for you, Autumn, what fears do you notice popping up for you now?
Oh gosh. I think I opened a wine bar in the middle of a pandemic that we still don't know what is going to happen, when things might get back to normal. And I think about it every day. What is going to happen if we shut down? What is going to happen? If someone gets sick in the family, because it's a family business. I have a lot of fears around my personal business right now. And then being multi-hyphenated, I sometimes fear being overwhelmed and not being able to give my business the attention I think it deserves. And I really fear being stagnant. This is like in Astoria, the smallest town I've ever lived in. I have always been someone, I think I've moved like every 2 or 3 years. For every year I've been alive, it's really hard for me to sit still. And I just opened a business in a city that's not like an online business that I can just get up and leave. So I've been battling a lot of like, can I still be who I am and run this business? And it is really, I do feel that I can, but those fears still creep up on me, because I'm just not used to thinking about myself in one place for too long, if that makes sense.
It does. And this is something that I certainly think about. So pulling the curtain back, Autumn and I live in basically like sister cities on the Oregon coast. And that is something that I think about too, Autumn. I was born and raised in a big city, in a big suburb of a big city. And I have lived in LA. I've lived in Portland. I've lived in Chicago. And I do. In fact, my husband and I were just talking about this, like, Ooh, is this, can this work? Like, are we standing in place? So that is a huge worry of mine as well. And, when you think about that fear of stagnation, what is it? What's the fear underneath that fear? Like, what are you worried is going to happen as a result of stagnation?
I've I'm not even sure what it is. I fear a lot of well, I don't know the correct way to say this, but just being disconnected from like progressive cultures and
Mm,
beliefs.
mhm,
Because there's so much in these small towns. They're very rooted in their history and the way they've done
mhm,
things, which I've come to realize in really crazy ways over the past year. Um, and again, I'm an outspoken person. I am not someone who likes to just shut up and hope things blow over. I like to confront issues that are directly in front of me. And I fear becoming someone who won't do that because I'm in a different place than I've ever been. It's not a big city. It's not, oh, I have a great relationship with my boss at Frank, and I can be very transparent with him. And it's probably one of the best working relationships
mm,
I've ever had because that is something I can do.
mhm,
Um, I don't know. I really fear like having to acquiesce to
mm.
this culture
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah. So Autumn, you talked about, thank you for all that you shared about like what comes up for you in terms of like, you know, being worried about being in a town where maybe there's not as progressive of thought or perspective that that you've experienced in bigger cities. And I know some of the issues that you faced with your wine bar when you first opened it, and I'm curious would be if you would talk a little bit more about that, about what happened and how that impacted you, because I think about um without telling your story, I'm going to let you tell it, but I think about the issue that came up for you, and that courage isn't always facing things head on. It's
Mhm.
not always speaking up and speaking out. Sometimes courage is keeping your mouth shut and deciding, this is not a fight that I'm going to take on right now. Like, that is also courage.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
you talked about that a little bit. So I just can you go into that a little bit more about what you faced and what decisions you had to make within yourself in order to really protect yourself and to move forward?
Sure. So we initially opened the wine bar in Seaside, which is just 25 minutes down the
Mhm,
coast of Oregon.
mhm,
And my mom had purchased a house there.
mhm,
We had spent a little bit of time, but not a lot. And the reason we picked Seaside was just that there was currently no wine bar there. And we thought it would be a great addition to the town for both tourists and locals
mhm,
because we know, Gearhart's really close. We
mhm,
know there are wine lovers in Oregon,
mhm.
and there wasn't currently anything like a sit-down wine bar.
Yeah.
But it was very the night of our opening party that we were in an altercation with one of our male neighbors who owns a
Mhm,
bar in town as well.
mhm,
And that disagreement was over something I found to be really just unnecessary for someone to be
mhm,
angry about.
mhm,
There were better ways to handle it.
mhm,
But because Seaside is one of these towns where people have been there for years and years, for generations, um, he had a lot of clout in the town,
mhm,
including with
mhm,
our landlord, including with the other neighbors on the same block.
mhm,
Um, and it very quickly turned into a situation where everyone was very combative with us, even if we'd never met them before. They didn't seem happy that we were there. Our landlord was giving us so many problems, like not allowing us to have our wine delivered to the bar because he didn't, I don't know why, but he wouldn't let us do that. He didn't want us to have flowers in the bar, like just so many little things that they started to stack on top of each other. We started to hear from people who came in and worked in the hospitality industry that we were being talked about in other restaurants in Seaside we'd never been in, and people were saying really derogatory things about us. And the thing is, like, I was in the music industry. I lived in Nashville. I have experienced so much of the like male ego and the discriminatory behavior that can happen to minorities and women in the workplace. A huge reason I wanted to start my own business someday was to not ever have to deal with that again. And the fact that it was happening almost as soon as we opened, I was devastated for a long time. And then it just came to the point where my mom and I talked about it, and it was like, you know what? We both are committed to this and want to see this business through, but it doesn't have to be in this location. We don't have to let ourselves be drowned in toxicity to run our business. And we made the decision in October to shut down and found a spot in Astoria that has been night and day from the experience in Seaside. Just so incredibly supportive, and a great community. Other business owners have been fantastic, and it was just thankfully like a sign that we had made the right decision and that we didn't have to live our lives in that kind of situation.
Yeah. And what does, because of course, you know, when you told me about what was happening, you know, my go-to was I was ready to start, you know, going door to door and letting people know what time it was, to be kind. But, you know, so that was my first reaction. And, you know, knowing what you said about like your sass, you speak up, but what decision that, because it when it is your business, right? When it is your livelihood, when, you know, like, you know, you have a storefront, right? There are other things that come into play. And so I'm curious, what was the decision that you and your mom made? I mean, you talked about it, but the decision to fight or the decision to leave, what conclusion did you have to come to decide what you were going to do?
I think there was a huge part of my mom that wanted to fight. We had talked about it back and forth, and I get that because that is a need to. But what it came down to and what I ended up telling her is I have fought my entire career. I have fought to have my voice heard in a conference room, to be credited for my ideas, for my salary, for my title, for my positions, to show people that I do know what I'm doing. I've had to fight. And I didn't want my business to be a place in that capacity that I had to fight that kind of situation. I will always fight for my business and do what's right for my business. But this was beyond my business and was like a personal situation that was like weighing on me as like as far as like anxiety and like depression, just put me in a really bad space. And for me, it was not worth the personal battle. I wanted to make the right decision for our business. And after I talked to my mom about it and explained where I was coming from, we both sort of decided it would be better mentally, physically, everything, if we did just move locations and just be rid of the environment.
Yeah. And so Thank you for sharing that, Autumn, and being willing to, unpack that a little bit, because I think it's important for the person listening. And you said it, right? You've had to fight for so many things that you have acquired, accomplished, won, been recognized for in your career. And and that's working for other people, but also working for yourself too. But I think what's important for people to take away from this is that courage, in just how I set up this part of the conversation, courage isn't always going in with your fists up, right?
Yeah.
Courage can also be choosing, as you said, peace, good mental health, not being in a toxic environment, not having to have to look over your shoulder, right?
Right.
At every turn, for these people that were, that really seem to have it out for you. So I want for the person that is listening for this, that is trying to make the decision to really, like, shed blood over something
Mhm.
versus choosing peace and choosing their, like, their heart health, right? Like, quite
Right.
literally your heart
Yeah.
health. That is courageous too. That is courageous to choose peace of mind. So thank you for letting me kind of bring that up, because I
I love
know
that.
that was, that was a really, it wasn't even me, and I was impacted, right? Like, because I hadn't been living here this long, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, are you kidding me? So,
Right.
I really,
Yeah.
I know I only felt a minuscule fraction of what you and your mom experienced. So again, just I really appreciate you for going into that conversation.
Of course.
So going back to the fears, talking about fear of stagnation and all of that. So how do you navigate that? How do you manage that? Because it's something that is an everyday situation that you're confronted with. How do you manage those fears?
I am incredibly lucky in that I have surrounded myself with amazing friends, and specifically women,
Mhm.
honestly, um, who I talk to every single day. And they're out still in those big cities, most of them, and doing their thing. And we can still have those honest, progressive
Mhm.
conversations and be upset about the same things and be in the trenches with each other. And then another thing that I'm just kind of exploring is, the wine bar is definitely one of those things that's gonna be here. I
Yes.
know it is. And what I just need to learn, and it's always learning, is how to um, give myself this business and allow it to be what I dream for it
Mm,
to be, but also
mm,
keep the parts of me that are important. So, like,
mhm,
the past few weeks, I still have certificates to get in wine education
mhm,
to bring myself up to where I want to be. And there are courses in Paris right before summer starts, which would be the bar's busy season. And I'm kind of like, you know what? I love Paris. Always wanted to live there. Maybe I'll just go for a month and take my courses and get that out of the way and then come back. I think it's just about finding my balance, like still taking that time
mm,
to go and discover the world and
mhm, mhm,
experience new things. And then just keeping conversations really real with the people in my life that know what's up and
mm, mhm.
can educate me and I can educate them. And we just share ideas and sort of do our thing in this world. I think that's what really helps me to overcome those fears when they come up for me.
Mhm, mhm. So I heard a little bit of, like, a new set of permission giving that you're needing to give yourself for this next phase that you're going into, right? Like, you're in a place now where, the business is in a beautiful location, and it is, as you said, it's a night and day experience. And so what I hear is that you're still needing to give yourself some permission for that balance, right? Not necessarily time management, but the balance of, personal goals that are kind of mixed with business goals, and giving yourself permission to be communicative with, as you said, the people in your life that really know you and know what's important to you. Is that accurate? Is there another place where you're needing to give yourself permission to step out of this like next comfort zone?
I think the only other thing I would say is that when you start a business, I have a lot bigger goals for it than just a wine bar. And sort of, I've always worked for smaller companies or other people helping their dreams come true. And this is the first time it's like mine. And giving myself permission to push it, because for me, it's always like, oh, how far do I want to take this? Do I want to just let it be a wine bar and just be happy with what it is? And I, again, not that person, but I do have to give myself the personal permission to push my business, because no one else is going to do it for me, right? But then I'm also not like, oh, I'm going to toot my own horn all day long. That's like really hard for me to do. So learning how to do that, tell people what we're good at, tell people why they should come, and what else is going to come from it. Just learning to give myself permission to do all those things as well.
One thing that you just said that reminded me of something that you mentioned earlier that I want to talk about of this, or ask you about, is a thought. And I'm curious if it was something that someone told you, or if it was something that you just internalized of you not being able to really use your voice, right? You talked about that in terms of like helping the women that you were working with in Nashville to really empower themselves. And so I wanted to touch on that just for a moment, because I know in particular, there are women who listen to this program and have expressed some of the things that they run up against of feeling worried about really using their voice and really, being authentic and being themselves. And so I wanted to hear from you, is that feeling that you had of not being able to use your voice freely, was that something that was communicated to you in some way, shape, or form, or was it just a message that you received and internalized?
I think that I was in my very early career, I was in an industry where it wasn't welcome for the most part. I worked for some people who were amazing and fantastic and listened to my ideas, but for the most part, I always felt like I was supposed to take a back seat to what was happening. And a huge part of like my 20s was really hating that and not feeling natural, but feeling like I had no choice. And I had to learn to overcome that. So when I see someone who can't or feels like they shouldn't use their voice, or I feel that way, it's something now I really want to push through. I don't want to leave things unsaid. I do feel there's something to be said for taking a step back for a moment and putting your thoughts together. I think especially as women, we unfortunately have to be really cognizant of the way that we come with and use our voice. And hopefully that changes someday. But that's always been a struggle, because it was never anything someone told me, it was actions. And now it's like, I feel like part of why I love to write and love to educate through writing is just trying to help people use their voice in any little way they can.
Yeah. And so in those moments, Autumn, even now where you feel like you shouldn't use your voice or that it's not welcome, what is it that you use to help you push through that?
I remind myself that if you don't use your voice, you're not going to get what you want. It's never going to go the way that you hope it'll go if you don't speak up. And that I've had situations as I got older and learned how to use my voice where things, because I asked or because I said something, turned out really wonderful. And then I've had those moments that weren't so wonderful, but I didn't feel like I shouldn't have said anything. You know, I think it's an empowering thing. And I'd rather feel empowered than feel like, oh gosh, I wish I had said that. And now I just feel like dimmed.
It makes perfect sense. And it reminds me of something that has come up in a few conversations on Courage Permission Slip, where people have, you know, had to do that assessing of, if I don't do this, if I don't say this, am I going to regret it? Right. And the pain of regret is bigger than the pain of the consequence of using your voice or taking a step forward or moving to achieve a goal that someone has for themselves or for their career. So that comes up a lot. It also comes up with coaching clients that I work with as well, of like, you know, there are consequences to every choice. And I love what you said of, you would rather not feel like you've dimmed yourself. Even if it doesn't work out the way that you wanted to, it would be more painful to not say anything and like let that kind of burn a hole in your chest.
Because I feel like that's what it does. And that's why using your voice is so important, because you don't want to feel that every day of your life.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Autumn, you have shared so many wonderful gems through your stories and through your actions and you know, the things that you're doing and thinking about right now. And so I'm curious to hear from you, for that person who is listening, who has a goal, who has a vision or an idea for their life or for their career, but they're not taking action on it because fear is a little more important than the goal or the vision. What advice do you have for that person to help them move forward?
There is a quote that I might get wrong, but you pretty much see it everywhere. And it's basically, you never really know what's going to happen if you stay inside your comfort zone. And for me, it's always been, it's not that these decisions I made were easy and it was like, I wasn't stressed about it and I didn't have anxiety and stay up all night long and have insomnia. They've all been hard at some point. But I definitely know every single step I've taken, whether it would be considered a success or a failure, got me to where I am today, to being able to open my own business and start that whole new journey, to meeting incredible people, moving across the country several times to Nashville, New York, Boston, wherever. You meet incredible people and they're my support system. They're in my life, even if I met them 12 years ago. Some of them I don't even see. It's all talking on social media or on the phone. No matter what happens, taking the chance is always going to be better than sitting around and wondering what will happen or what would have happened if I had taken that chance. And it will feel terrifying and scary. But if you push through it, there's going to be an outcome that is meant for you. And that's honestly what I believe above everything else.
Ooh, that is a gem. That is such a gem, because that question of what would have happened if I had tried that? Again, that goes with the regret conversation. Right. And that's just, you know, I think people have to decide for themselves, is the possibility of regret more important, or is it taking a step and then letting that lead you to something that could even be better and bigger than you ever imagined initially? So thank you so much for that. That is, I love that so much, so much. Autumn, this has been such a lovely conversation. I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I'm curious to hear, where can people get a hold of you, get in contact with you, learn more about you?
Yeah, so I have two ways you can contact me. I have my personal writing portfolio online. It's my name, Autumn Hale, Haile, last name.com. And then, of course, if you're ever coming to the coast and want a really amazing wine experience, you can find us at the Vineside, and that is thevineside.com. And I am always open to just meeting new people, talking things through. Doesn't have to be a work thing at all. But yeah, that's where you can reach me.
And it is truly an amazing experience being at the Vineside. It is my go-to
Thank
on the coast. So just that is literally the only place that I tell people to go. So
Thank you.
Autumn, oh, thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate you. And I will share all of Autumn's contact information in the show notes so that you can visit the Vineside and follow Autumn's writing expertise online.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for watching and listening. And until the next time, make sure that you are making your dreams and your goals more important and bigger than your fears. Until the next time, thank you.